Kay Refituson, who is the Executive Director of Transparency International Initiative Madagascar, and Camila Zuluaga, who is an international advocacy lawyer at the Colombian Commission of Jurists. I'm also joined here today by Birgit Kanslab, who is the coordinator of the Civic Space Unit. So I'm not going to take up too much time today. Today, the event is for you to speak to activists and to defenders. But we're here today to talk about the UN Declaration on the right and responsibility of individuals, groups, and organs of society to promote and protect universally recognized human rights and fundamental freedoms. That is the long name that nobody ever uses. What we're talking about is the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. So the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders was adopted 25 years ago by consensus at the General Assembly of the United Nations. The declaration has been essential to protect those who defend human rights. And on its 25th anniversary this year, we consider it time to celebrate the declaration, as well as celebrate human rights defenders and all the contributions they have brought to us. The declaration was a landmark document that set out the rights and responsibilities of states, human rights defenders, and all actors of society in ensuring safe environments where defenders are recognized, valued, and encouraged to work for the promotion and protection of human rights. But beyond this, over the last 25 years, we've seen significant developments in international law and standards on the role, recognition, and protection of human rights defenders, both within UN experts, bodies, regional, and national bodies. This project also builds on the Human Rights Defenders World Summit in 2018, which called on us all to take stock of the developments in normative frameworks related to the protection of defenders and to further develop norms contained in the declaration to enhance protection. So I'm here on behalf of ISHR today, but as you'll see up here, this project that we're here to talk about has a number of partners. I will list them all for you. So Amnesty International, Civicus, Defend Defenders, Forum Asia, Frontline Defenders, FIDH, Gulf Center for Human Rights, ICNL, ILGA World, IM Defensoras, Women Defender Coalition in the MENA region, OMCT, Protection International, and RFK Center for Human Rights. We're all working together to launch a collaborative project that's looking to analyze the contributions of the declaration to defenders' work to date and looking at progress in international law, norms, and standards in the protection of human rights defenders. The project itself, which I'll speak a little bit more about afterwards, it seeks to enhance awareness of the declaration and to encourage dialogue on the protection of defenders and putting civil society and human rights defenders at the center of a conversation that's fundamental to them and fundamental to their work, which is the right to defend human rights. So in speaking about putting defenders at the center of all of these conversations, I will stop talking and I'm going to start asking questions of some of the incredible panelists we have here today. So Kay, I'm going to start with you. In your work in your region, do you consider the UN Declaration is relevant to your work? And also, do you consider there is adequate awareness of the declaration in your movements, and is it being implemented?
All right. Can you hear me? Perfect. Hi, everyone. So very glad to represent Madagascar here. To answer a question, Tess, so our work is related to anti-corruption, and the declaration has been very helpful for us so far because it enshrines, the rights of human rights defenders, but also the obligations that states have. Even if it's not mandatory, I mean, it's always glad to have them listed somewhere in a document. But the fact is that the sense is that we know that only few actors in Madagascar, and regionally speaking, know about the declaration itself. I mean, people know it if they work for the UN system, for instance, or if they have studied international human rights particularly. But there is not a common knowledge of the declaration, even among civil society organizations and human rights defenders. So there is a gap to be filled. And this is why also we have been pushing for the adoption of a national protection law for human rights defenders and whistleblowers in Madagascar, because we feel the need for a domestication of the declaration and for making it really binding on a national level because it doesn't have to be a set of whispers, if you want, or wishes, but it has to be enforced in national legislation. Otherwise, we will remain, struggling, because in our case, anti-corruption activists are judicially harassed. We are persecuted by the police when we blow the whistle against corruption, so we feel totally neglected. And this declaration can be a powerful instrument if and only if it is translated into national legislation. I will stop there for now, Tess, but we can continue later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kay. Robbie, I'll hand to you now also with the same question. We did prepare separate questions for all the speakers, and in preparing yesterday, we all decided we wanted to talk about all of the things, so it makes my job a bit easier.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Is that audible? Okay, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I think my colleague here has just shared similar concerns that we have. And of course, the deterioration, it is relevant. But the problem, as my colleague just mentioned, is that it remains a document if it's not enforceable. It remains a document if it does not influence impact on the ground. So that is the gap that needs to be bridged in terms of how do we enforce these particular agreements at a global level, your recommendations, the ratified treaties. So I think that is the work that needs to be done on the ground. And one other thing that I would like to mention is that there's a bit of a lack of awareness with regard to declarations at the ground level. Awareness with regard to the treaties which were actually ratified by the states. Awareness with regard to the recommendations which were passed during those other processes, like your special procedure process. So those are type of information that needs to be escalated down to the ground so that people can be aware and hold the state accountable, because it calls for a collective monitoring. Not only the state, not only the UN, but even the people on the ground, the people on the grassroots level. It's very important for them to be involved because they are directly affected and directly involved in terms of on the implementation of those ratified recommendations and stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, Robbie. Camila.
Okay, you hear me, right? So in Colombia, the declaration has been like the instrument with which defenders have been able to achieve laws and achieve policies. So one of the clearest examples that I want to share with you is the National Guarantee Process or National Guarantee Program. I'm trying to translate from Spanish. That is a place or a discussion that we had since 2009 with human rights defenders, state, and international community to design strategies for the protection of human rights defenders. So for us, the declaration is the starting point of the policies. The defenders in Colombia have managed to ensure that the broad definition of human rights defender declaration is applied, because with that we prevent, for example, the use of classification of who is or who is not a human rights defender. So this declaration also made, we use the declaration to demand also the rights. And we use that, and I'm going to share another example with a tutela action that is a lawsuit where we claim to the state our rights to defend their human rights. So the complete implementation of the declaration is now a challenge, and is the main challenge also because just only for 2023, like the Colombian Commission of Jurists report only for this semester, and since January to May, 70 murders of human rights defenders in Colombia. So we have a long track to implement the declaration.
Thank you so much. And thank you. I think it's really I mean, unsurprising but interesting that there is a sense of alignment along all of the interventions, that the declaration does remain relevant to defenders working across various regions, that their awareness of the declaration is also lacking despite the relevance of the instrument, and also that the implementation is lacking. But there are some good stories that have been shared amongst all the panelists in terms of attempts and efforts and successes in applying the declaration at the national and regional level. I'll now turn to you, Birgit, and ask you to speak a little bit about some other anniversaries that are happening this year and what the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights is doing in relation to those.
Yes. Thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a really great honor to be here with you and have this very important discussion. We have two other big human rights anniversaries this year. Probably many of you know. The one is the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the other one is the 30th anniversary of the Vienna Program of Action, the Declaration and Program of Action, which is maybe a little bit less known. Both of them really are about the universality of human rights, about this absolutely amazing idea that everyone is born free and equal. And I think we cannot say it often enough. And the High Commissioner really wants to use these anniversaries to reinvigorate the commitment to human rights, to find ways a little bit outside the bubble, to remind people why the declaration was actually, drafted and adopted at the time, and to show that human rights are really part and parcel of every life in dignity, that it's not a set of legal standards and not a piece of paper, but that it's something that we really use and apply and ask for every day, everywhere in the world. Yeah, so I think in that spirit, he has called on states and also all other actors, civil society, businesses, to think about how can we give that amazing document the weight that we want it to have. And maybe just also to say that really, for me, all of those anniversaries are very much linked. Yeah, the Universal Declaration means nothing without the people who work on the ground every day to bring it to life. And the Human Rights Defenders Declaration is about those people. And I think we really need to see how these anniversaries and how these tools and instruments really complement each other, but also reinforce each other, and think collectively how we can use them really to inspire people to fight for human rights and to stand in solidarity for those who speak up.
Thank you, Birgit. I think it's really important the way you connected those, and our executive director sent an email at one point, and I think this is very cheesy but also kind of beautiful. And then we say the Universal Declaration of 75 years plus the 25th anniversary of the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders is 100% human rights. You can't have the protection of human rights without human rights defenders being able to work and being able to conduct their activities freely to protect human rights. So thank you so much for sharing those other anniversaries. I'm now going to go back to you, Robbie. This is another big question because we decided to clump it all together. But I wanted you to speak a little bit about the biggest protection challenges for defenders, and in relation to that as well, in relation to the current protection framework, what are the gaps that you see in terms of the challenges you're facing? And a little bit also, if you could speak to the role both of civil society in states in both enhancing those protection frameworks and actual protection for human rights defenders.
Okay, I think on that question, of course, there's a lot of challenges which we share as human rights defenders across different nations, and still, the civic space is shrinking, unfortunately, and that calls for action, for improvements on our legal framework. what is happening now, like I'm just going to speak in the context of South Africa, that the killing of human rights defenders is actually increasing. As I'm speaking now, when I'm going back to South Africa, I'm down to the ground working with the people, I don't feel safe at all. I had colleagues on the ground level that were killed, and I just cannot work freely anymore. Now, the government is not doing anything about it. It's not even talking about the killings on the ground. It's not even talking about or discouraging or making a public statement to say we discourage this. So human rights defenders are not visible in the eyes of the government in South Africa. So no matter how much we cry, no matter how much we try to engage with the government, we are just ignored. Nothing is being done. So this is actually the sensitive space. And one thing that we need to understand, the importance or the significance of the human rights defenders is that they are actually working or taking the responsibility, which is the constitutional duty of the state, to protect its own citizens. We are sacrificing our lives and people are sacrificing their lives on the ground in terms of doing some other work to say, let's protect our people on the ground who are being bullied by corporates, who are being bullied by the other states, organs. So, but the government is not doing anything. I think we call for government to actually take an action on this. And now we are saying we need a policy or law that seeks to recognize and protect the human rights defenders. And we actually ask for a declaration as well to do the same, so that we can have actually pressure that's coming from the global level. So that's very important. I think I will stop right there. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to say only two challenges. I think that one of the challenges is that in Colombia, the state only provide physical protection measures to human rights defenders. So these measures are generally I don't know, for example, armored cars or bulletproof vests, but it's not taking or is not counting the real necessities of the human rights defenders in territories or with their communities, or even it's not like a collective, or they don't provide collective protection measures, and they, for example, forget about the family of the human rights defenders. So this is one of the main challenges, but also on the other hand, in Colombia, we have many laws and policies regarding to the protection of human rights defenders. For example, the peace agreement. We have also laws regarding to the protection of human rights defenders, an emergency plan, a program for women human rights defenders. But the problem is that this is not being fully complied with it, and the efforts of, for example, this new government and this change of government to stop violence against human rights defenders are not being sufficient. And the solution is, for now, not create more policies or laws, or only have this discussion like a discourse, but we need real measures, and we need also budget for implement these laws and these programs. So I think that this is the two main challenges.
Thank you.
Yeah, for my part, I mean, I won't talk much about challenges because my colleagues already addressed this, but I will focus more on the shortages or shortcomings within the declaration itself, because as we experience its implementation at our small scale, we feel that the declaration first does not contain, any provision directly addressing the stigmatization or criminalization of human rights defenders, while it should. And the declaration is also very silent on the duties of non-state actors including businesses, there is a total void on that point. Well, we can know that some business sponsor states and state repress human rights defenders. So there is, a niche to be investigated on that and to be worked more in the future. And the declaration as well is silent on any duty of states to protect or support defenders outside the country or territory. So this is also something subject to worry, because now we live under an area of transnational crime, and repression also goes transnational. Therefore, protection must also go transnational. So there is this wide dimension that we need to explore. And to answer the question on state responsibility, let's just remind what the declaration itself asks from states, and I will read it to you. So first of all, to recognize the value and important contribution of human rights defenders to peace, sustainable development, and human rights. If this only one thing was done, made by state, I think that our status would be different today. Second, ask, respect human rights defender on a non-discriminatory basis, protect them against action as a consequence of the legitimate exercise of the rights referred to in the declaration, and ensure access to effective remedies in the case of violations and prompt and impartial investigations of alleged violations. Once again, everything is already in the declaration, but our states just don't care. And I see today, in this room, many states which support this declaration. And when we were in trouble in Madagascar, some of these states wanted to rescue us and supported us. So I'm thankful to them. I can see, for instance, Norway, the United States, France. There were also the European Union and the UK, which supported us in a joint declaration. This is something that can be done on a broader way here in Geneva, within the United Nations. You can do more, and we really encourage states to do more, because you are the first responsible of the well-being of your citizens, and the human rights defenders are part of your citizens, and we are global citizens today. To conclude with, I'm also calling on civil societies, society organizations, because we have a role to play on that, even raising awareness about the declaration itself in our own constituencies, appealing for more from our states, nationally speaking, despite the risks that we are all facing, and also trying to do more joint advocacy regionally and globally for claiming for this declaration to become something bigger, not just a declaration. Our colleague from OSCHR mentioned those anniversaries, important ones for this year, but this year also marks the 20th anniversary of the UNCAC, the UN Convention Against Corruption, and human rights defenders and anti-corruption activists are among the most repressed one worldwide. So there is something to be done, ladies and gentlemen, about that. I will leave you here with that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Kay, and to Robbie and Camilla. Thank you for really clearly highlighting the risks and challenges that we're facing, and Kay, especially for highlighting the gaps currently as you see it in the declaration. I mean, the declaration is 25 years old, and it was a consensus document at the General Assembly. So of course, there were some compromises that were made in terms of the protection of human rights defenders, and we still are struggling at the UN level to agree unanimously around even the term human rights defender. So I wanted to build on what Kay was saying about the role also of civil society. One of the reasons why we came together as this coalition of organizations that I alluded to at the start, and I've referred to this project which we're calling the Declaration Plus, is that we were seeing in a lot of our work and all of our organizations' work on human rights defenders that the awareness of the declaration was lacking, that the implementation of the declaration was lacking, and the content of the declaration is was adopted 25 years ago. So therefore, there's been developments in international, regional, national law on the protection of defenders. And so the project seeks to come together and hold consultations. We started holding consultations in March. All of the defenders you see on the panel before you and many of the defenders also in the room around you have participated in those consultations, seeking to get inputs from activists at all different levels on their protection needs, on their awareness of the declaration, on the way in which the declaration is responding to their protection needs. And the idea is what it will come out of this is, I mean, we're flexible because all of these consultations may lead to other things. And so it's not only this that may come out of this project, but the idea is that what comes out of this project is a civil society defender-led supplement to the declaration, which collates and collects all of the progress that's been made in the last 25 years on defender protection and puts it in one place, creates a rallying point for human rights defenders when they're seeking to enhance their protection. And as all the panelists have said today, for states to simply implement their obligations to protect human rights defenders. Again, you see up there is all of the organizations listed and a link to a web page, which is a landing page for the project, which has all the information on the project. And you all have little postcards in front of you. This also has a QR code that links to a survey for defenders to take, but also all information on this project. So I don't want to spend too much more time speaking about that, other than to direct you to these postcards and to speak to any organization whose logo is here or many of the activists in the room as well. I now want to hand back to Birgit and ask another question of you, and specifically the OHCHR. What is the role that the OHCHR can play in terms of helping to both strengthen and encourage states to implement these protection frameworks?
Thank you for the question. It's always a hard question to answer because we are doing a lot, but of course it's always not enough also. So just putting that caveat up front, I would like to say really every part of the office and every mechanism also works, of course, on the whole set of human rights and also works a lot with human rights defenders. And I think we are all very proud of the fact that we are the kind of UN links to civil society and to human rights defenders in many places in the world. And really, so really the work on human rights defenders, I see it as a red thread through all the parts of OHCHR. More specifically, we have a shift in our latest office management plan, the so-called civic space shift, that is really about recognizing that that the space for people to shape their futures is central to everything. Yeah, that there needs to be much more of an effort, a joint effort to bring the voices together to think about how do we protect that space, online and offline. And as we are, you have maybe heard, preparing for our next planning cycle, I think that focus on civic space is going not only to remain, but probably also going to be strengthened, because we heard civic space is always under pressure. At the same time, there are also always ways to do things. People, it's one of the most amazing things about my job to see the creativity also of activists and defenders around the world in making things happen, even when it's very complicated. Maybe quickly just to say, so of course we have the High Commissioner's voice, and you have heard him. The High Commissioner takes up, talks a lot about civic space. We also have some entry points in the broader UN. The Secretary General has made actually hearing the voices of people, listening to the voices, one of his big themes also. So one of the areas that we are doing in my unit is really supporting the UN also to be more strategic and also to support civil society. The big change we would like to see is really the recognition that the UN like states serve civil society, not the other way around. Yeah, that the recognition that the real agents of change are the people and those who raise the voices, and that we need to recognize that we, through our programming, through all the, all the forms or the formats in which the UN can be present in a country, be it peace missions or development teams, that we really have to build and anchor our work much more in what defenders see, and also, of course, understand better what is going on with your help, and make sure that the different constituencies are heard when we support you. And maybe just to say one more thing that I didn't say in response to the first question. Also because there was a lot of talk about laws and policies around human rights defenders. I think, not every country is the same. Sometimes we've heard also examples of there being already a lot of laws. But maybe a good way of using the anniversaries and also the High Commissioner's initiative around the 75th anniversary is really to think how, what would be useful in your context. And the High Commissioner has asked member states and other actors, also businesses, I said, to make pledges at the end of the year. And maybe that is a good opportunity to, really come together with other partners. And I really think maybe the other point I want to stress is we need to expand also our universe and really reach out to other parts of civil society and other human rights defenders who maybe don't self-identify as such, and see whether at the end of the year you can get the pledge of something useful that would actually make resonate your missions and your work, and protect you much better.
Thank you, Margit. So one of the things we also wanted to make sure we did in this event is allow space for conversation. I know we're always trying to balance that inside events at the UN, especially when we have the 1 hour time limit. So we're now going to turn to interventions from the floor and questions to our panelists. But I'm going to hand initially to Mr. Abdullah Ahmadi, who is the Director of Afghanistan Democracy and Development Organization.
Thank you. And I also talk on behalf of HRD Plus. Thank you for the panelists. I want to share some different case regarding to HRDs. Unfortunately, Afghanistan didn't sign the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defender. And human rights defender situation in Afghanistan is worse. Civic space is closed based off the report which is published by Civicus. It's rated closed. As I can say also that human rights defenders in Afghanistan are among the bravest human rights defenders in the world, because without any protection, they are fighting and fighting for human rights in Afghanistan. They are facing with the threat, torture, even death. Many of them have to escape, and now it's in a neighboring country, some of them in exile. But in another side, the current situation, the Taliban didn't recognize, it is okay that we are not signed the UN Declaration on a Human Rights Defender, but Afghanistan signed before many other international human rights laws, such as other convention and other documents. But the Taliban also didn't recognize and accept other international human rights law. They just use the pressure, and they just implement the Sharia based on their belief. In this situation, that civic space is completely closed in Afghanistan, and the Taliban didn't recognize and accept international human rights norm, standard, and commitment. And they are also committed many human rights violence. And by condition that human rights defender of Afghanistan is under high risk without any protection mechanism available inside Afghanistan or in the neighboring countries, Just my question, maybe you have some example of from other part of the world in this condition. What kind of the suggestion you give to us, especially for those who are under serious risk and threat or are in the neighboring country? And from other side, I also request from the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights and other member party, as because Afghanistan is the nation, the citizen of Afghanistan is member of the nation society and have the basic right. And this situation, I know that should be considered the international mechanism of law. What kind of the mechanism you suggest to us? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmadi. I might take a couple of other questions from the floor and then hand back to the panelists. For states, feel free to put up your sign. Yeah, jump in. And then here.
I hope I'm audible. So mine was a question. There's been a rise of anti-gender and anti-sex movement, right? And it's been quite spreading to African countries. And mine was to just ask, like, what are some of the mitigation strategies that are there in place or that you folks have considered? Because some of this, like policies and even bills that are being proposed by some of the Christo-fascist people from the West are actually affecting many African people, and many African queer Africans are actually running away, and most recently, like the case in Uganda. So like, what are some of the strategies in place that you folks are considering or maybe you're working on? Because some of these policies and bills are actually affecting queer people in the sense that they can't even live their normal lives. They can't even access some of the services. Some are being evicted, which is unlawful. But again, we are also considered unlawful. So there's no sort of like protection. We are being seen as others or like as imports. Yet these are our countries. So like, what are some of the strategies like you folks are considering?
Thank you. Is there a question just here as well?
Yes, I'm a journalist freelance, Boris Engelson, and so I don't really speak the same language as you human rights activists do, but I still think that I was able to grasp more or less what you are talking about. So I checked online the statistic. I saw that Latin America accounts for approximately 2/3 of murders of human rights defenders. Even in South Asia, West Asia, Africa, it's minute compared to Latin America. So do you have an analysis for that? Because if it's a specifically Latino American issue, and it is not, I just say that to make a little bit black and white my question, then it is not a general issue of human rights in the world. And also, I think 5 to 1 are men in the casualties. And in the case of Latin America, it may well be that the perpetrators are not always states. In the last Brazilian election, the Bolsonaro belt was in the Amazon. So how do you cope with how will declaration, let's say, fix an issue which stem from the good people, the holy masses, the proletariat, or the farmers?
Thank you so much. Okay, I'll turn back to the panelists before we go for some more questions. Just to add on to the question on Uganda, actually, I think is a really important question for this conversation, because not only did that law criminalize the existence and identities of LGBT people, but it also sought to restrict and criminalize the action of defending LGBT communities. So it sought to two things, both criminalize identities and stop anyone from seeking to defend and protect those rights, which is totally contrary to the idea of the right to defend rights, which is what the UN Declaration clearly sets out. So thank you for raising that question. I just wanted to add that connecting point before I hand to my panelists. I don't know if Birgit, you wanted to respond, as there are quite a lot of questions that are to the UN system and what the UN system is doing in relation to Uganda, Afghanistan, and other contexts.
Yes, thank you for all these easy questions. I mean, you know, these are really the big issues we struggle with, I think, in the civic space context around the world. Very constrained spaces where there is a lot of control of, you know, what people can do and not do. And there is no easy answer, because I think, you know, the only thing we can say is really we need, you know, you need to build up what can happen at some point in the future, by, you know, building alliances, keeping in touch, trying to keep networks intact. And I think also maybe going back to that point that I mentioned, you know, about, I mean, creativity is maybe a lot to say, but by really looking for the little inroads that you have. Not all participation needs to be about the most controversial issues, yeah. And it's very important, and I think that's also why sometimes the civic space framing is useful. You know, you can engage at the local level around certain issues and try to move a little bit the needle. Now, is that a satisfactory way? Absolutely not. Yeah, I'm very unhappy with my own answer, but unfortunately, it's the only one I have. On the same is true for the anti-rights movement. I mean, that's also an interesting question from the civic space point of view, because really we need to be careful to give the space for everyone. Yeah, and I think, you know, so we need to keep up the engagement. Of course, if you have very powerful actors who don't engage and don't recognize human rights anymore, I think, yeah, there is no straightforward answer. And you know that in Uganda, our office has been closed. Even our office that over decades has actually always, you know, had some space to defend defenders and to work with the government also to improve the human rights situation. So sometimes we are also on the receiving side, unfortunately, of states that just decide not to reduce the human rights engagement. Maybe, and the non-state actors, what can we say? Non-state actors, you know, the state, of course, has a responsibility from a legal point of view to make sure that human rights defenders are not attacked or harassed or by anyone, including non-state actors. And I think we've come a long way in you know, also cooperating and creating better engagement tools with private companies around some of those issues. But again, you know, we continue to see violations and abuses on the side of the private actors, and violations in terms of the states not stepping in to really implement the protection in far too many countries around the world. Maybe just to say about the killings, I mean, the statistics, that is a complicated question, because it depends also on the strength of civil society, how well they can collect the information and you know, record violations. I just want to say killings are, of course, one very cruel and terrible aspect, but we also have a very different set of countries with very large-scale detention of human rights defenders. This is one of the topics the High Commissioner has also decided to prioritize as part of this year's initiative, to really see how we can help the people who are in detention for exercising their human rights. So very often human rights defenders and journalists. Just to say that, there are different sets of abuse and violations that occur in different parts of the world. And of course, the killing statistics only tells one part of the story. And in many ways, really the investment in human rights would be such a good prevention. When we look at many of the most terrible situations in the world, the longer I work on human rights, the more I see we saw it coming. Yeah, almost every time we knew that it cannot, that it's deteriorating, and that really some decisive action is needed to stop the deterioration. And unfortunately, it's not always happening, or not far too often not happening. So I really think, let's collectively also try to make that prevention point, and show to people how our struggle for accountability and for more human rights would actually really be a good investment for the majority of us.
Thank you, Birgitta, for sharing the UN's perspective on some of these responses. And just I think to build on that, where you ended on collaboration, I think the point that you make over here about the anti-rights movement is the impact this is having in certain countries. There is strength, there is funding, there is kind of building of these movements in other countries, specifically in like WEOG states. And so I really welcome those states in the room to collectively work together with us and to support the universality of human rights, to see the impact that is happening as well in various countries. I will now hand to Camila to respond to the question on Latin America, and then I'll hand to the other panelists as well to respond. I think there was a question of, is it also bad for defenders in other regions? And I think I'll stop there because the answer is obvious.
Okay, so it's a difficult question. I think that it's true that in Latin America we have like highest numbers of the violence against human rights defenders. Colombia is on the top of the list, but it is right too that being human rights defender is a high risk activity in any part of the world. So an example is people who defend LGBTQ rights, women's rights, people with disabilities. So I don't want to answer like why in Latin America happened this, because we have like a lot of different causes and different contexts. In Colombia, the thing that I only can answer is one of the main problems is the impunity and the lack of access to justice for human rights defenders. So the institutions are not working for protect human rights defenders, are not working to prosecute the people who attack the human rights defenders. So sorry if it is not like the whole answer, but thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to go, Robbie, and then Kate? Yeah.
I want to respond to the situations with the LGBTQ community. I think this is one of those increasing outcry, and I believe there's no country that is an exception. We are all facing that. But what I can refer to is the initiative that we are taking in South Africa, whereby we are pushing for the policy which seeks to recognize and also to protect human rights defenders. We are including the LGBT community as well, and also the whistleblowers. And in South Africa, it's actually more escalating with the whistleblowers as well. You know, people are, due to corruption, once you mention or you give us information to say, this is the person that has committed a corruption, you get to be targeted and silenced there and there. So that's unfortunate. But so in that initiative that we are taking, we're including all the human rights defenders. We are not being selective and say you are on the other side. So is the law that we believe that is going to benefit everyone else, that is going to hold the state to account when someone is actually missing, someone is being killed or being threatened, because you need to act at the time when someone is being threatened, when the information steps in your door, because we are likely to just react to when someone has died instead of doing something before a life is lost. So I think that's one of the things that we need to be talking about amongst ourselves as civil society, to say, when someone is actually saying, I'm receiving threats, what do you do there and there quickly before life is lost? So those are some of the actions that we need to take as a collective, and then so that we can actually preserve lives. Thank you.
Yeah. So, you know, I think that all of us are struggling around the world currently. But I don't know. I think that there is a lot of undocumented cases of abduction, murders, harassment, threats, whatever you want, in Africa and elsewhere, but especially in Africa, because our governments have this bad habit of pretending that everything goes right. And when they come here to speak at the tribune of the United Nations, they say that they are championing social justice, equality, whatever, and you don't have to believe them, because this is not the reality that we face every day. So please, is there any kind of death toll that we need to complete or to achieve in order for our issues to be seen as important? It's up to you to answer to that. But we have here in the room a lot of human rights defenders from various countries of the world. And behind the numbers, there are human stories. You should speak to them, ask them if what they face on an everyday life is important or not. Is it a global issue or not? Your point of view, I'm sorry, really reflects one of these attitudes that we face, not only in our own states where we are considered as troublemakers, but everywhere, you know, like all those human rights defenders, they have nothing important to do with their lives. But it's about dedication, and maybe you don't know about that. But think twice before saying such things. Sorry for being emotional.
Yeah, but what question
And
you cannot tell them you don't know.
yeah,
I
but
know as much as you do. And
exactly.
I perceive your attitude to be insulting. And
I'm sorry.
I'm going to
about
cut you
that.
off there. Actually, we're running out of time. Kay is a panelist here.
Yeah.
We're here to listen to activists and defenders. Thank you so much. I'm actually getting
Just-
the eye from the back of the room. So Kay, I'll let you have one more sentence and
Yeah.
then we'll close the session.
30 seconds just to say on our colleagues in Afghanistan and elsewhere who are struggling. These are, you know, those organizations can help. And there is also this kind of international solidarity we can trigger. But we can talk more about that maybe later on the session because we're running out of time. Thank you so much.
I'm going to have to cut it off because I'm getting told by 3 people at the end that I'm getting all the hand signals that are possible and they all mean the same thing.
Sorry.
I've got 3 no's. Sorry, I don't have the power. If we could keep talking, absolutely. But this is the point, is that the reason why this project exists is to keep having these conversations. So we're here, all of the organizations are here. We're going to be discussing this for the next 6 to 7 months. Please, let's keep having the conversation. And thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much.